Welcome to the Disrupt Now podcast, episode 60.
Create the highest, grandest vision possible for your life because you become what you believe.
What makes people excited is progress. You don't have to be at the goal yet to feel alive again. You have to make progress.
Just do right. Right may not be expedient. It may not be profitable, but it will satisfy your soul.
What matters most is finding your inner purpose.
Disrupt Now, a coaching program and a podcast designed by entrepreneur and visionary Natalie Viglione. In this podcast, we bring together disruptors and life game changers that will help empower you to disrupt status quo in order to progress you towards the ultimate vision you have of your life. We'll explore alternative topics with our guests whom are global healers, meditation gurus, transformational life teachers and coaches, women entrepreneurs that are fighting to make this world a better place, and people in general that are disrupting industries from education, fashion, technology, art, health, and much more. Please join us on this journey to move humanity to a much higher level of consciousness and create more mindful conversations.
Hi everyone, this is Natalie. We're back with another Disrupt Now podcast episode, and I am really excited for the recording today. So I have a very exciting guest. I am actually reading his book at night and just taking it in and consuming it, and it's just an amazing, amazing book. So Christopher Penczak is here with me today. He's a modern witch. He's an award-winning author and co-founder of the Temple of Witchcraft. So welcome, Christopher.
Thank you so much. Hey, happy holidays.
happy season of the witch, and just like, we have so many things to talk about, and this is such a beautiful time of year, and this book has just been magical, as of course it should be, right?
Exactly.
So the book, for everyone to know, and for everyone watching the video, I'm putting it in front of the camera. So here it is. Just so you know that I'm not lying, I'm actually reading it. It is The Inner Temple of Witchcraft, Magick, Meditation, and Psychic Development. And okay, Christopher, we have so many things to dive into, so I'm going to just stop going on and on about the book because we're going to dive into that regardless. What I really loved was the first thing, I think that when we think about the inner temple, I loved that that phrase, because the first thing you have in the book is know thyself. Temple of Delphi, Greece, right? Know thyself. Probably the most important thing that we are here in this life experience to do, as we well know. So your journey, and I loved reading about your journey, but I would love our audience to know how you stepped into your power, how you stepped into this purpose, because I think for many of us, it's an interesting combination of stumbling through things, experiencing things, and then fully realizing, wow. And I'll share some of my experiences too, but let's talk about that. What did your experience and journey look like getting kind of where you are today? That's as much as can be included.
I used to describe it as kind of accidentally stumbling into things.
Yeah.
But I think all of us have super magical things from childhood, but we're kind of conditioned to ignore them. Totally. I got pretty deep on the path. I was like, wow, I had some weird things happen growing up that I don't think necessarily makes me special. I think we all have special things, but we're just kind of conditioned not to believe them or to kind of put them off to the side. So, looking back on it, I had a very youthful experience with astral travel. I had a very powerful, profound experience in high school speaking to the dead, but I sort of always pushed it back to, that was make-believe. That was my imagination. That wasn't real. How I really seriously got studied into this was I really started as a skeptic, and so the first introduction I had to it was a very longtime family friend and a good mentor of mine, who was my art teacher. She was my art teacher from when I was 7 years old till about 16, 17, gave me my first job, owned a business in town, and was like the cool hip adult that, you know, I could hang with.
Yep.
And it was back in the day where there really wasn't a lot of public pagan families, or witchcraft wasn't in the news. It's hard for people to understand today. It was way before all the TV shows, both, you know, comedy and drama and documentary were out. So people didn't talk about it, you know. So she was very of the training mindset. You didn't tell somebody who was under 18. You didn't want to be, you know, corrupting a minor, that type of stuff. So she went when I was 18. I finished, graduated Catholic school. You know, ironically, I asked her to be my sponsor for confirmation. She's like, "Oh no, I really love you, but I can't do that," which always surprised me. Why? Because I knew she was raised Catholic, but now I get why.
Right.
And she introduced me to it, and she slowly kind of introduced me through different concepts, and then finally, I like to say, she dropped the W word on me. And to me at that time, it was ridiculous. Like this idea that a modern person who is so independent and so creative and so just a modern woman of the world who I really looked up to thought herself as a witch, because that seemed to me, had all the stereotypes everybody has with it, like the Halloween kind of imagery. I'm like, that's crazy. Why would you think that?
Right.
So I immediately started thinking she was in a cult. You know, I was like, oh, I need to rescue her from the cult because she's my good friend and I love her. And she's like, you know, slow your roll. And she's like, I'm happy to talk with you about this, but you don't know enough about it. And I was like, well, I don't want to go to your cult meeting. She's like, you don't have to go to a meeting. But she gave me a couple books. And that she's like, once you read the books, we'll have vocabulary enough to discuss it. And, you know, so the first book she gave me was on quantum physics. And I loved it. And I was very scientifically minded, but I was like, yeah, this has nothing to do with witchcraft. She's like, yep, hold on. And then she gave me a book on Hermetic philosophy, which is a book I talk about constantly in Kabbalion, because it's a great introduction to it. And I was like, this is interesting too. And it's sort of saying what the quantum physics book is saying in a different way, but this isn't witchcraft. And then she gave me a book called Power of the Witch. And it was by her teacher, Laurie Cabot, who eventually became my teacher. And, you know, and I saw how it all fit together in the context of the witch. And we started talking. And through that talking, I realized she wasn't in a cult. And I got really interested in it. So she taught me how to meditate. And she taught me how to read tarot cards. And she brought me to some of her coven meetings as a guest, when I could come as a guest. And I had a really profound experience with the spell. So in that spell, had a friend of mine who was in a medical crisis, had not gotten any care through the crisis, kind of revealed to her family she was in the medical crisis. She was actually pregnant, still in high school, just graduating high school, and actually lost weight during the pregnancy because she was, you know, having great difficulty coming to terms with it and didn't take care of herself.
Right.
And so by the time we found it out, she was in danger, the baby was in danger, all sorts of stuff was going on. And my spell was for her to, you know, her to be healthy and survive, her baby to be healthy and survive, and to put out, you know, the phrase I used, which is so important. I always tell my students to like write down everything. The phrase I used, may the labor be as easy as possible. And normally you don't do spells without people's permission, but my teacher was like, I feel this is important. And she laid out all her tarot cards and she looked at it and came back to me and she's like, I think if we add this and this to make sure she accepts it on all levels and all that, it'll be okay. But she's like, normally we wouldn't do this, but we did it. And then the 6 weeks or so goes by from that. And I find out she was in labor for like 3 or 4 hours. Up walking around later, the baby was fine, she was fine. And for the dire circumstances we got before, everyone was baffled. And it's not that I don't think her family wasn't praying for her, and I think that has effect, you know. And
sure.
But I went back to read my journal and was like, may the labor be as easy as possible. I can't imagine a first-time pregnancy with all sorts of medical problems, you know, being 3.5, 4 hours, you know, being any easier. So I was like, oh, there's something here. And that made me want to investigate a little further. And I got to a point where, you know, she's like, you have really great questions. And I feel like I can't answer those questions anymore. So I'm going to take you to my teacher. And so she started bringing me down to Salem, Mass. And I ended up taking classes with Laurie Cabot and becoming a priest in the Cabot tradition of witchcraft, and had a really profound experience with psychic diagnosis with Laurie. And that's a key part of her teachings. It's become a key part of my teachings, where you hit someone's name, age, and location. And you don't know anything about them other than that. And you get into a trance and you describe them and you pinpoint their physically diagnosed illness, and you get confirmation from the person you're working with who's giving you this information. But they don't give you any hints or anything like that. And it's not through tarot cards, it's pure psychic. So when she told us we're going to do that, I was like, there's no way I can do that. And then you see her demonstrating, you're like, all right, well, you've been doing witchcraft for, you know, how many years, and Laurie Cabot can do it. But by the end of the training, you can do it. And I was just blown away, and it really emphasized the interconnection between everyone and everything. And it really inspired me to, you know, get myself together and to realize, like, my thoughts have effect, whether I realize it or not. Other people's thoughts have effect on me, your attitude, how approaching things. And I was, closeted gay boy coming out of Catholic school, going into music and art school, and I was not happy. And so that was like the light bulb for me of like, I'm the one responsible for my happiness. Other forces will affect me, but my unhappiness could adversely affect other people. Do I want to be responsible for that? And so that's when I deeply started studying witchcraft. I didn't really commit to it full time for a number of years after that. But it was my guiding star through college and through early adulthood. And then I just got to a point where a goddess had come to me and basically had said, you need to teach more. And I kind of kept on putting it off because at the time I wanted to be a rock star. I had a degree in music, had long purple hair. And I was working.
Ooh, purple hair. I had purple hair too.
Purple, red, depends on which times, yeah.
Yeah.
And I loved it, and I loved the creative side of things, and I thought that was the best way I could contribute through art, through music. And then when I finally agreed in meditation, I said, all right, if you want me to teach more, I'll teach more. I lost my job 3 days after that. So be careful what you wish for, but what you agree for,
That is so true.
And basically the goddess said, as long as you follow this path, you'll be taken care of. And that's been true. I'm a very Taurus sun sign, so I'm very much about security of money and home and finances and food and all that. And to give up a job that wasn't that great to begin with in the music industry and pretty risky to go to be a full-time witch, it was crazy in my mind, but I've been taken care of ever since. It's not been easy, but I've been taken care of. And that sort of led to the teachings and the writings and the books and the temple.
Amazing. Amazing. It's so interesting when, because since I was little, I've been very, 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 into what you would call, my words around it have become more, experienced as to really what it is. But I guess you could say that the occult and, witches, and I loved it. But what I find most interesting about this is that to say the word witch and to say the word witchcraft and to say these, it feels like they're taboo. Mm-hmm. And I really, like you, thought, there's something about this, but I could feel myself, it's like I have this innate authentic being, and that's moving one way, and I was kind of moving the other way in life. But I could still see that and feel that energy. But it was very interesting because it was like I was denying it and have been denying it. And I just want to share the reason I was really looking for good, practical books on witchcraft. And that's how I found you and started. And that's what I feel like you relate is this is practical. Mm-hmm. This is, this isn't some esoteric thing that no one can understand and that it's been inverted. And it's really thinking about how we attach ourselves to our ancestors and our innate beings and our gifts and purpose. And I kind of thought when I started my business a little over 4 years ago that that's my purpose, this, and then it keeps unfolding. Like more comes to you as I know you're experiencing, which we'll get to. Things just keep bringing themselves into the path, and you can accept them as opportunities. And anyway, long story short, I have the meditation component of the book and really digging in a little bit of a different way in working with energy. I have been able to connect with my ancestors, whom I have learned are Celtic, they're Irish, and Scottish and British, and in that whole realm, the Great Britain as it used to be called, and connecting with these visions of priestesses and a powerful line of healers. And I've always bridged art and science together, so my mind just keeps blowing because I'm like, no wonder this makes so much sense. So I feel like we need to talk about the history part of all of this. Because I'm sure for you, you denied it at first, and then as you stepped into it, the full understanding of what witchcraft means as healers, as energy workers, as shamans, as all these words. Right. but clearly there's a point in time, and this is part of the book, where I was like, consuming like so fast because it was so interesting to me. Literally the word witch was murdered at some point. Like it was taken, inverted, and the loving energies and healing what like witchcraft really stands for was just lost. Yeah. And we are so, I think it's coming back, but I feel like we just separated from it for so long. And thank you 2020 for the wake-up call, because I think getting to the roots of like, how did this shit happen? Like, how did we get so far away from truth, right? Yep. So let's talk about that history part, because I think that's important.
I think a preface to the history part, you said something that really struck me, and I want to go back to it. Okay. About your authentic self, and you were drawn to this, but there was a part of you that kind of moved away. One of the things that has come, the more I practice this and the more that I work with people, is this understanding of the witch as even almost an orientation. And some people get really upset when I talk about it, and I'm talking about it from my lens, so other people's lenses are going to be different from it.
Sure.
But it's almost a coming out process. Like,
totally,
people are drawn to being witches. That's something inherent in their soul, and I think it's a global phenomenon. I think what I teach, or what I've been taught and I pass on, comes linguistically and historically through that European lens, and through Great Britain, and how there's like the witchcraft resurgence, which we can talk about. But I think you could be a witch at heart and practicing Catholicism, someplace.
Sure.
You could be a witch at heart and be in India, or, Australia, or wherever it may be, in whatever the indigenous or native tradition is in your area. And I think that was more recognized. I think we as modern witches who've been so divorced from it are looking for finding recognition from these other people. So I think, being a witch is sort of like being queer. Yep. You either are, you aren't, you awaken to it, you may find other people, you might not, but it's something inherent, even if you don't have the word for it.
Totally.
So there's so many amazing words for witch that aren't the word witch, in different cultures. But I think a lot of them, not all of them, but I think a lot of them have undergone this transformation and this disconnect. So, if we go to the most ancient people, before we had lines on a map, before we had the levels of division, we had people in each group that worked with the unseen. Mm-hmm. And to me, those are my oldest witchcraft ancestors, even though they probably didn't use the word witch in the way that we do today.
Right.
And as we started to settle villages and towns and build our first city-states and things like that, it was our first divide. So we have some people who stayed in the rural pasture and kind of had the more folk traditions. And then we had the other people with these skills that started to build the ancient temples. But I still look at all of them as my ancestors. So whether you're like a priestess of Isis in ancient Egypt, or whether you're the cunning woman at the edge of the village, at the crossroads somewhere, that's still, to me, a witch.
Totally.
And, each culture had its own specialists in these things. So I look at all of them as my witchcraft ancestors from a kind of broad perspective. Mm-hmm. And then particularly, when things become more conservative, when other dominant religions come through, when dogma comes through, there's often a shift in the culture. And we like to say the kind of modern, easy first story that we learn when we get into this is the rise of Christianity and the demonization of pagan faiths. But it actually started in the pagan faiths as well, too. So like if we go back to ancient Greek, one of the words we use for witch is the pharmakoute. And even you hear that word, it sounds like pharmacists. It's like the plant people and the people working with the herbs and potions and things like that. But by the end of the late Greek period, witchcraft was somewhat maligned. You look at the old Greek stories, the witches are not the heroes. They're kind of the seeds of our first villains. When you think of Medea, when you think of Circe, and, so it wasn't just the Christians, but the rise of the Holy Roman Empire really amplified it all.
Right.
We get to the Roman era, one of the Roman words for witch is the venefica, which I love that word.
That's a beautiful word.
Interpret it as venom, and so it gets interpreted as they're the poisoners. And others interpret it as Venus, and they're the followers of the goddess Venus, and she was the goddess of flowers and cultivated lands and gardens and things like that. In the old stories, Aphrodite, who's the Greek Venus, as she'd walk, flowers would bloom in her wake. So there's a lot of beauty to those images, but it depends on which way you want to believe or which way you want to look at it. And not to say, witchcraft does have a history of poisoning, and our view of poison and poison is different today. A lot of things we consider deadly poisons today were sedatives when you did surgery. Were ways to kind of kill pain. It was, they knew the dosage better. Today we just look at that and say it's bad, kind of like witchcraft. but everything was used at that time because we didn't have kind of the modern pharmaceuticals. And then we have the rise of Christianity, and at first it starts persecuted, and it actually has a lot of things in common with pagans today because it was persecuted. And then as it becomes the official religion, and there's the schism between the East and the West Church, and then we have the rise of the Holy Roman Empire, there's a certain level of scapegoating of the old pagan religions, and the archetype of the priest or priestess becoming the witch of those old religions. And there's a lot of debate on how much of that was really going on. Was really practicing, was this kind of chasing phantoms, and we have it repeat time and time again. If we look at like in the 80s, the Satanic Panic, there was this whole kind of move of witches around every corner and Satanists around every corner, and they're out to capture your children. Well, that's what they were saying in the Dark Ages too. How real that is, and people were practicing other things. They probably had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
So it's a scary time to see history repeat. But that idea of priest or priestess as magic worker, as dream interpreter, as healer, as spirit talker, as shamanic practitioner, as conduit, got inverted. And so anything that wasn't Christian, wasn't sanctified by the church, had to be other. So you'll see a lot of the deity names become demon names. Some wonderful philosophers preserved Greek philosophy in like Christian hierarchies of angels and things. So some stuff gets preserved, but it's also distorted, so people don't really know what to do with it. I grew up Catholic, and I learned about angels, but nobody actually told you how to talk to the angels or how to do angelic magic or, what angel did what. The Catholics weren't super concerned about that, even though it is preserved, because it was too close to witchcraft. It's too close to magic.
Right. And what I find really intriguing about all of this, when I think back to my experience in the dogma, in these uniform religions, this, for me, it was just kind of this generic blanket of Christianity. And I'll never forget when I was about 11, I looked at my parents and I was like, if you take me to church one more time, I will become a Satan worshiper. I didn't know how else to voice, how words around what I was really feeling. I couldn't even conjure up the right words, but I knew that what I was learning was false. I knew that what I was being told was the reality, was an inverted reality. I felt it in the very fabric of my being. And so when you are that way, and when, as you said, you start looking at religion and a very, dogmatic approach to a religion, I should say, I feel like the beauty is taken away, and our gifts are almost taken away. So that inversion becomes, something that we are almost afraid of. And what I really loved is how you put witchcraft as a mystery school. And I think this mystery school concept, it's come up a lot for me in research and reading different things, like the Emerald Tablets and, Gnostic research and looking at all kinds of different, just different avenues. And it's interesting because the foundation comes back to this mystery school concept. So let's talk about that, because I don't feel like a lot of people understand what that really means. And I also think that, we've taken figures such as Jesus, Yeshua, whatever, name we want to insert there, but this loving, unconditional love teachings, and kind of even inverted that.
So. I agree wholeheartedly. I think with the mystery school, like I'm a witch, but I'm classically an occultist. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things a lot of people identify as occultists, we believe in a perennial tradition. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there was one tradition throughout the world that everybody agreed with, but it's the idea that underlying all traditions are some basic human realities. Right. Each culture and each place expresses it differently based on their environment, their language, their history, their customs, all of that. But there's kind of an underlying eternal truth that just has many different faces to it. And the mystery schools, I think, were the gateways to understanding that perennial tradition. You know, a lot of modern witchcraft today looks back at things like the Eleusinian mysteries and, you know, the worship of Persephone and Demeter and Hecate and that whole story with Hades for the seasons. And on an outer level, for most people who are not into the mysteries and into occultism, it's a story about the seasons. And it is, you know, but on an inner mystery level, it's a story about the soul. And it's about life after death and reincarnation and the promise of return.
Right.
And it's understanding that, you know, a lot of our mystical, magical lore operates on many levels. So it has a practical, you know, this is the way the world is, and this is why we have seasons, or this is why, you know, the sun and moon rise. And we might think, oh, that's not really scientific. Well, it was poetic, you know, it was part of the mystery. But then the deeper kind of story of the soul was based on experience. You know, I look at religion, there's a huge move, and I was a part of it, and I've kind of shifted my thinking of it over time. I usually avoided, when I was younger in this, avoided the word religion in the context of witchcraft, because it was so, you know, religion was a scarring thing for so many of us. You know, it was not a positive experience. So I don't want to associate this thing that's really great in my life, witchcraft, with religion. Yet now, as I run a community and help educate others, in our society currently, religion has a certain weight to it and also certain protections. So in a place where you cannot be fired for your religious beliefs, if witchcraft is identified as a religion, then you're protected.
Right.
And which is not the case in all the country. But if you're at a place that, you know, can fire, you know, will not fire you for your religion, but you say witchcraft is not a religion, then they can fire you for being a witch. You know, so there's certain protections. So I learned witchcraft as an art, a science, and a religion. I used to change it to spirituality. And then someone had a whole talk with me about the different types of religions. And that's helps me understand the mystery aspect of it, of a mystery religion or a mystery school. There's prophetic religions where somebody has a great experience, they write it down, they share that writing with you, and you're meant to believe in their profound experience as your guidepost of how to live your life.
Right.
You know, and then underneath all of those traditions, there's the techniques for you to have your own experience and then be able to make your decisions based on your experience. So the mystery traditions were about direct experience. So they'd have fasting and incense and maybe, you know, psychedelic substances, or they teach meditation techniques or breathing technique for you to have the profound experience. They create a container so you can, you know, have context for that experience and you can experience it safely. And I always go back to the Eleusinian mysteries. Like, we really don't know what they did because there was a vow of secrecy and silence and nobody broke it. Even the people who wrote about it never broke down the details of it. They talked in generalities. And you have to think how profound that was and how long it lasted and how many places it was exported to and people would come back, you know, that it had to be so profound for people.
Right.
And I think that's what witchcraft today is trying to reclaim. So a lot of my teachings, although there's history and there's context and there's culture, there's also technique. And the main thing I don't care about, not that I don't care about anything else, but I'm less attached to you memorizing history as I am to somebody picking up the book and trying the experiment and having their own experience, you know?
Exactly.
I think that's what a mystery is all about, having your own experience.
Right. Because it's hard to put some of these things into our words, our languages, regardless of what it is on this planet, because it is something other than a word. It is an experience, and that's really difficult to, I mean, even when you're journaling and writing and you're like, I can't describe that feeling. I just know what that feeling was.
And English in particular is limited, you know, even a lot of English languages had a little bit more birth to it. Like, we have one word for love.
Right.
A lot of other languages have many words for all the different types of love. So you can be specific in what you're talking about. You know, they're all love, but still.
Exactly. Or, you know, a more poetic way of speaking in general. So I feel quite limited in the word realm, but, and I think this goes into the consciousness conversation. So I, like you, had some very weird experiences when I was very little, and some of them I'm hyper aware of to this day. And while I can't put my finger on the exact age, I know I was very young, but I felt energy in profound ways. And I will never forget, I was on my parents' bed and I was young. I mean, I want to say I was like 4 or 5. And I remember like getting into like a fetal position because I remember is like I was overwhelmed by things speaking to me and talking to me. And I just felt like all this energy around me, and it was overwhelming. And I had that happen often. And so, and then as I got into my later years, my teens, I had I had psychic dreams. And I had all of these things happening to me, and I couldn't really, I couldn't really understand it. And I wasn't in an environment in where I was encouraged to even talk about it, which most of us, I'm sure, come from the lucky ones, I'm sure, are have a different experience. But so I loved the way that you have described in this book, the innate gifts, that psychic abilities, these aren't things that people don't have. We just discover them and have to embrace them, and then, just like anything, use them and work on them to make them better, stronger, and more profound for us. So let's talk about that a little bit. What has been your experience in that discovery process? And I'm sure people struggle with this.
Absolutely. And I 100% agree. Natural abilities that we all have that are hardwired into our biology, our consciousness. But I think as we're conditioned and we get more language and we don't have words for it, so then you don't pay attention to things you can't talk about. And if no one gives validity to it as a kid, if you have these experiences, you just sort of condition and compartmentalize yourself to kind of look at them in a different way. My own experiences, it's having to break that wall down, because I think I had some profound experiences when I was younger that I conditioned away. And then rediscovering, when you get on the path and you, as an adult, make a conscious choice of this is what I want to do, you sort of conditioned yourself to fail. So you have to kind of reopen those gifts up. So a lot of times, and I work with a lot of people who are skeptics, which you always attract the people that, so I'm used to working with skeptics, and also people who feel like they don't have these gifts. So, I remember, and so much of why I wrote Inner Temple is the first in a series.
Yeah.
A lot of witchcraft books start with the rituals. Here's how to do a spell. Here's how to cast a circle. Here's how to call the quarters and the elements. And I had some of those experiences early on with my teachers, and nothing happened. Not that nothing happened for them, but nothing happened for me. So like, I remember a really profound full moon ritual. Someone I didn't know very well in the group, and I was just a guest for it, was just like, wow, could you feel the energy of Archangel Michael? And I was like, yeah, I heard you call him. Like, well, no, it's powerful. And I was like, if you say so, and he was just dumbfounded that I couldn't feel it, but I was brand new. And I was like in my analytical mind trying to figure out why they were doing all the things that we're doing, but nobody taught me how to feel those things. So a lot of my inner temple work is about, well, how do you prepare yourself for this outer work? Because if you can't feel it in the outer work, is it really going to help you?
Right.
Maybe, but it's much more profound to be able to have the direct experience. That's why we start with the inner work. I always tell people who struggle with it, people will say things like, oh, the energy of this crystal was so amazing. I'm like, when I started, I was like, yeah, it's a pretty rock, and I was like, I like geology. I wonder what kind of crystal formation is in there. But, when they're like, can't you feel it in your solar plexus? I was like, nope, I can't. So it took a lot of quiet, still meditation and being receptive and not beating myself up for not feeling things, and trusting the process and practice.
Right.
A lot of times people are very talented in this. So if you take a class and you're the one who's struggling, because you may have 9 or 10 out of 12 people who get it the first try out, and you have to go home and practice it. I was that guy. So anybody who says that you can't, you have to be talented at this right off the bat, I totally disagree, because I did not appear that way. I think we all have the talents, but I struggled with it. When I was younger, I had some profound experiences. I was, total sci-fi fantasy nerd, as many of us are, because we know there's a truth to those things.
Totally, yes.
Even though we don't know why, and I almost became a chemist, because I loved playing with little bottles. And I had this profound sense of, I've done this before and I want to do it again. Then I realized how much math was involved in chemistry, and not that I can't do math, but I didn't want to spend my life doing math. So I became a musician.
Which is also math in a different way. It's interesting, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting. It's kind of a scientific pursuit either way. But I remember having these kind of childhood plays of wizards and witches and collecting flowers and drying them and putting them in little bottles and knowing there was something important about it, but it was framed as play because nobody else agreed that it was important, you know?
Right.
And I had probably the three most profound experiences I had kind of growing up that informed my witchcraft and my training. When I was in the 4th grade, I passed out in the middle of the class. They did like a scientific movie that had surgery being depicted, and it probably wasn't even as graphic as I thought it was, but queasy stomach still to this day. And I fell back and passed out and observed myself fall. And observed the teacher coming to get me and put me upright. And I observed the whole class freaking out around me.
I got chills, so.
Yeah, and then I remember the snap back into my body and looking at everybody going, what happened? And I remember talking to the nurse, and then my mother picking me up from the nurse's office and talking to my mother, and everybody telling me, no, you must have imagined that. That's not real. And so I believed in the moment because you had a trauma, you know, okay, that's not real. And I had no context. I didn't know the words astral travel, you know?
Right, exactly, right.
But looking back on it, it was probably my most profound astral travel remote viewing because it was so spontaneous. I had a very good family member, my great aunt, who I was incredibly close with, who was very supportive of my whole life, pass away when I was a sophomore in high school. And, you know, going early morning Catholic school, you know, in the dead of winter, she passed in January. And the windows reflecting before even sunrise. So it was in essence what witches today would call a black mirror. It was a piece of glass that was reflecting the lights on the inside of the building off a black background. And I was just grief-stricken and didn't want to be in school at that time, but you got to go to school. And I'm just kind of staring out in the window and saw everything kind of swirl and become her face.
Oh,
and this whole mental conversation in homeroom and school, you know, and then it's snapping back out of it and going like, what was that? You know, and then talking to people about it afterwards, you know, friends and my parents, and being like, oh, well, you know, imagine that, but if that makes you feel better, that's great. And I was like, looking back on it now, it's totally a witchcraft technique, the black mirror technique, you know. And then there was a documentary that my mother and I were watching on the Trail of Tears, you know, as they're repatriating the indigenous people of America and the horrors that happened on the Trail of Tears. And we both watched it on TV enraptured and both started crying at the same time and just looked at each other. And my mother turned to me and goes, do you remember when we were there? And I said, yes. And then we kind of snapped back and we're like, what was that? Like, why did you say that? I don't know why. But then we did past life training in witchcraft. And I was like, oh, I think we really were there. And I think we were there together. And we've always felt this, you know, closeness to each other. So, you know, at the time, there were all weird things that happened growing up, you know, but when you start studying and understanding the esoteric, it was something that was real.
Absolutely. And bring so much meaning to it.
Absolutely.
Rather than these random, weird, you know, you're crazy kind of, you know, emotions that get wrapped around that. It starts to really, oh, wow. You know, if I have another, I know you're going to laugh, and I don't think I've mentioned this on this podcast yet, but when I was little, I said I wanted to be a part-time fairy and a doctor. And so for me now, having this culmination of everything that is purpose and it's moving through me, I'm like, hello, that to me is the witch. That to me is the magic. That is the healer. And again, we don't have the words to put around this stuff.
Actually a tradition and a term of fairy doctor. In the Scottish fairy traditions and some of the Irish fairy traditions, there's this idea that if you trespass against the fairies or you're out of a land, the fairies will get pissed at you. And a lot of illnesses in the natural world. And, you know, so regular medicine's not going to fix that. So you need to get a fairy doctor that'll put things right between you and the fairies.
Okay, you just blew my mind again. See, here we go. And it's, oh my God. So how powerful is it? Because I think when we're young, when we don't have all of this programming yet, you know, we are so free to experience what our soul needs to express. And so often, you know, we're not, that is not cultivated.
Right.
And that moment between your mom and you, that's a beautiful moment. That's beautiful. And, you know, it's interesting because I look at my family, the women line in my family, very strong lineage. And I feel that now and I understand it more. But what I think is sad is I know that they have not embraced that ancestry. And I'm like, oh, if you guys only knew what it's, you know, to connect with that, to energy, to that, you know, to that lineage, and to that, to feel that power and that love, and that it's amazing, because then I feel like we can feel at home in ourselves, which I find, you know, a lot of your book and the work. And I love that you ask the, you know, the person in this first book of the series to commit to a year of work, because I think that's also powerful, because you're not, you know, too often we're looking for this, like, I want to do this now, like, come on, let's get to the magic part. It's like the magic is the magic of the journey.
Absolutely.
Right. So
Yeah,
I really love that.
a huge part of it is these are my course books. You know, before they became books, they were actually the course material. So in teaching with people, I've noticed, and we all kind of go through it too, some people pick up magic books just for the section they need. You know, I need a money spell, I need a love spell, I need the formula for this, I need the formula for that. And that can be good if you know still the person who created the book has a journey in mind for you. And it has a very clear, it's almost like listening to music. There's a clear beginning, middle, and end. And I think the ritualizing the process of it. So all the 6 books in the series have that type of ritual to it. So it asks you to commit and, you know, write an intention slip, and there's a graduation ritual initiation at the end. And there's a whole process to go through. And I make my students do that as well. So that's the first lesson for them.
I love that. And actually, you know, part of this learning has been because I've never been attached. Okay, so first of all, I don't know why, but since I was, you know, I understand now, but since I was very little, Halloween, my favorite, I mean, adore Halloween. And now Samhain, you know, and now realizing, you know, how these pagan holidays or celebrations, I should say, were taken again, like out of context and mixed with all kinds of different things, and, you know, power, control, greed, blah, 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 words that are so wrapped into history. But I really enjoyed also learning more from your teachings in this book, and it sent me on an exploration around the wheel of the year. So I would love to talk about that, because I think that, you know, I've never connected with Christmas, obviously. And I like you know, I have a lot of trigger words from my past where I don't like to say the word God. I say source, you know, I don't like to say religion because it just has I just feel kind of like, bleh, it makes me feel a little dirty. So, you know, I think that there was a reason that, you know, like Yule, you know, feels better to me. Right. Like I can wrap myself around that concept. And now I understand why the tree was a part of this whole thing. Like, wow, you know.
A lot of the weird things in Christianity make more sense when you realize they've been adopted from paganism. Yeah.
Totally.
Like drags, you know, where did that come from? Yeah.
Right. Like there's I don't know, some comedian was like, you know, what was that, a drunk person that decided to, like, I'm going to drag a tree into my living room and put things on it, you know? And I'm like, oh no, I understand now. Like, I get this now because that, you know, so let's talk about that.
So I think the first thing I would say, and I totally get where you're coming from. So any word that you have difficulty with, to look into the roots of it, and then try to kind of, even the word witch, you know, that was a big part for me, was looking at, and there's so many different etymologies of witch and people disagree on it, but you know, we all have our biases. So we take the one we like the most, that seems to make the most sense to us. But even like the word religion, I changed my view on the word religion, as we were talking about before, but also realizing that the root of it means to link or to bridge. And in many ways, religion's almost the Western word for yoga, you know, because yoga is to yoke or to link. So I was like, that's really what it was supposed to be. So let's try to reclaim that.
Right.
Very big into reclaiming words like, you know, witch and like religion.
I love that.
So when we look at the whole wheel of the year, it's important to realize that, like, our modern wheel of the year is an amalgam of several different cultures that kind of come together in Great Britain, you know. So it's got a mixture of the Celtic fire festivals, it's got a mixture of the solar holidays, particularly in Wicca and witchcraft, in the modern sense of it today, has that Eurocentric view. So it's got a lot of the Anglo-Saxon coming to us through it. But you find all across the world, people celebrated, and most indigenous people celebrated any type of equinox or solstice and the travel of the sun. And that's become a basis of things from, you know, India to all across America to Australia. And then realizing, how do we want to celebrate it? So, a lot of modern witchcraft has the mixture of the Celtic and the Saxon. So many of the things we think of as the spooky, witchy stuff of Halloween is very American. It's interesting. I had some folks from Wales visiting, and they saw all like the trick or treat decorations and everything, and one of the spookiest places. And they got a horse's head with a skull, and they do this between what we call, and I know it's printed to say Samhain, but we actually usually pronounce it Samhain. So from Samhain to Yule, they have like this ghostly horse haunting people and doing all that. But they were enchanted with the idea of the actual pumpkin jack-o'-lanterns, because in Europe it was turnips. They would carve out turnips because they didn't have pumpkins. So it's interesting to know, how things kind of mix and mingle and how we've been influenced, and then how we share that with the world. But for me, there's two ways of looking at the Wheel of the Year. There's locally, seasonally, what's going on. So like another big one is May Day or Beltane. Right. And some of the traditions would be, you celebrate May Day when the hawthorn tree blooms. But it's going to bloom at different times for different people. And today we've kind of anchored the wheel around the calendar that we know. So usually May Day is the 1st of May, or Beltane Eve is April 30th. And I always look at it astrologically. So no matter where you are in the world, there's these astrological shifts going on with the sun through the year. And even having the opposite season in the southern hemisphere, it's almost the shadow of these different seasons. So like we talk a lot about Samhain and we talk a lot about Beltane, and their signs are Scorpio and Taurus. So it's death and sex. And they each kind of contain their shadow, and where Samhain's all about the ancestors and everything's dying and withering and the life force is going back to the spirit world. At Beltane, all the life force is returning and everything is virile and green and sexual and all that kind of coming out.
Blooming.
Yeah, exactly. But they're like two sides of the same coin. And if you look at all 8 of the holidays, they all kind of shadow each other. So I try to approach it from a modern perspective if we're trying to celebrate on the same day through the astrological lens. And the fire festivals, and when the sun is 15 degrees in the sign, so they'll celebrate Beltane not on May 1st, but maybe May 6th or 7th. But it gives us like a good basis because we have all the same astrologies going on in the sky at the same time, so we can all kind of link into that. But what's going on in the sky also reflects the seasons. When we enter the cardinal signs, it's the beginning of a season. Or in the fixed signs, it's the middle of a season. When we go to a mutable sign, it's the end of the season. And that's when we have our equinoxes and solstices, and it flips over again. So it's really rooted in the earth and the heavens, which I really love about it. Right. A lot of people think of witchcraft as just earth-based, but it's really earth and star-based. We work as stars are nature as well too. The heavens are nature, the planets are nature, and they reflect each other. We often talk about as above, so below. They're linked. Exactly. So it's recognizing both, I think, is important.
Absolutely. Yes. And the interesting point to all of that is in those celebrations and as we're learning about it, even how to say Samhain.
We have a lot of funny words in there. Like if you're reading a book where it looks like it says Diosil to mean clockwise or sunwise, it's actually pronounced Jeshil or Jedsil. Oh. But to spell it out phonetically, it looks like Diosil. So it's one of those interesting things. Even if you try to put phonetics in the books, you can tell who heard the words, and you just, adjust as you go through. But we have a lot of weird words that we have to kind of get used to. So
yeah, exactly.
And Widdershins and Samhain, all those good things.
Exactly. But I really, what I love about learning this, and should I say, rediscovering that to all of this, is that it feels right. It makes sense. My body sits with it, and I can be, I'm comfortable in it because it is like, oh yeah, that's right. That's exactly it. That makes so much sense. So just being in more in sync with nature, with the cosmos, and everything that we're talking about, that goes on within us as well.
Absolutely. We have our
as above. Yeah. So, it's the micro and the macro on all levels, which again, that's why it's interesting, because this is so scientific, because it does get to the quantum levels. It does get into the quantum mechanics and that conversation just as much as it gets into, astrology. And it's right. Just, it's absolutely, it's just like phenomenal when you actually are putting all these pieces together, and then you can look at it and say, oh my God, this picture makes so much sense. Because before it was just so distorted and broken.
A big thing that's been helpful for me, starting in the skeptic mode of it, I was always like, well, I'm a rational person. I almost became a chemist.
Yeah.
This seems all sort of crazy. I need to have a rationale. I need to have a plan. And in studying the history of it, realizing until we kind of entered the age of reason and, industrial revolution and started separating out the different disciplines, most people we would have considered scientists in the ancient world were also metaphysicians. So, almost all doctors were also astrologers because they believed you had to time your medicine and you could see what was going on inside a person by looking at their astrology. Most of these natural philosophers, recognized earth, air, fire, and water. I think today we misunderstand that, thinking, well, we call them elements. And today we say, well, the elements are hydrogen and helium and all that. Those, earth,
right.
air, fire, and water aren't things. Well, that's not what they were talking about. They were talking about energies.
Right.
Those energies. But like our smartest, most learned people, whom we still recognize on some level, believed in all of this. And we sort of look at that, modern people today, not us, but most modern people today, some almost forgive them their seemingly culture and time period. Like we can look at Plato and we can absorb these wonderful philosophies, but he was also about metaphysics. And we kind of pushed to the side the metaphysics. Well, that was his time period. And, we're not going to hold that against him. But if he really was that smart, which I think he was, why can we not value the whole picture? Or why can't we take a second look at these things?
Right.
So much of the foundations of democracy and philosophy and science and understanding of the world were by people who were deeply versed in this. The idea of being a priest and a scientist, and the idea that the priest was also the architect and build the temple plans and knew the metallurgy and knew the stone cutting and knew the medicine. It was all integrated, and you could have your specialties, but there was an integration of worldview.
Yes.
I think something happened, and I think it's easy to blame. It's very easy as a modern witch to blame the Catholic Church. It's very easy as a modern witch to blame the Industrial Revolution and all, and I think there's fault there. But at the same time, I think if you look to the Magick, there's always this idea of bringing things together and separating and having them come back together. So even though the separation is painful, it's necessary because what's going to come back together will be that much better.
Right. And understood on
Right.
the deepest of levels. So you've, and I think this is an interesting year that we're speaking for all the things. Like that's a whole other
word for this year. Yeah.
It does. That's a whole other podcast episode for sure, because, I really see the power in, we need to understand magic, both from a dark energy and a light energy, and looking at both of those sides, because that is what this particular planet, I believe, is anchored in, and the yin and yang, and we can, go into all those concepts. But I think thinking about magic, and that's why, you use the Magick version, so that we can distinguish it against the stage magician, right? Like we're not talking about the same kind of magic here. So what do you have coming up for you? And this is a series, so let's talk about that too. And you have new books in the works and all kinds of stuff.
I do. I'm pretty busy. It's weird how life takes you, so even starting as a skeptic for this, I started doing the classes, and the classes got to be these big sessions of notes, and then the notes got turned into books. So I do a series of 5 classes that are year-long each. And they're the degree traditions within our mystery school. And after teaching them for a number of years, I had a body of graduates that wanted to do more and wanted to be more involved, which I didn't really give a lot of thought to. I thought, do it and go out and do your own thing, and that's great. But people felt a bond and built up community.
Mm-hmm.
It started with my mother and I offering Samhain rituals, not to the public, but by word of mouth. And then we started doing Beltane rituals by word of mouth. And then I ended up getting hired by a couple of local stores, and I started doing Wheel of the Year rituals there and classes and such. And then a group of people, we had this discussion about wanting to do some of the witchcraft traditions, and the modern Wicca traditions are named after people. And that was never my intention. So when I started having a group of students calling themselves Penzackian witches, I was like, oh no, I don't want that to happen. And it's fine for the traditions that have names from their founders, but I didn't want that.
Right.
To me, it was all about the self-empowerment and not about, any one person. So we ended up creating a community, and from that community, a nonprofit. And from that nonprofit, kind of spiraled out to create bigger and bigger things. So the Temple of Witchcraft was based on the Temple of Witchcraft series, and it administrates the school, and we bought property. So we have property in Salem, New Hampshire that we're slowly turning into community center space. We've got rooms that are open to the public in the main house, and we have a barn that's going to be converted and reconstructed to be a community center. We got about 5 acres to do outdoor activities.
Oh,
and
how cool.
we really opened up a lot of our ministry work too. So, not everybody in the old traditions of modern witchcraft, by old, I mean 50 years or so, everything was so coven based. You started your own coven and you did the whole process again many times. Not everybody who's into this should be running a coven. Not
Right.
everybody who's into this wants to run a coven. So what do? They can stay kind of where they're at, but that can sometimes get stagnant too. So we wanted to create a home for people who wanted to do environmental activism or social activism or prison ministry. I got deeply involved in prison ministry for about 8 years, which is
Wow.
a challenge in itself, but beautiful challenge. I feel like it was really rewarding. Or, who are the people who are really great at organizing but don't want to lead a ritual? Who are the people who really want to teach things that I might not teach, like cooking magic? Can we create a community that provides support for all of those things, so everybody doesn't have to start over from the beginning like I did?
Right.
So that's what we've done. So we have a ministry based on the 12 zodiac signs, and we've got a council of 12 ministers that oversee them, and I run the school portion of it, and it's been pretty amazing. And so from that point on, our original vision was to do a publishing company to support the temple. But because of my previous success as an author, the IRS wanted to keep everything separate, which I understand. So we ended up starting a separate publishing company. So although I have a lot of books out through major publishers, I've also created a smaller publisher to do those more esoteric mystery type stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
This way I don't have to worry about the commercial pressure of, the publisher wants to sell 50,000 books.
Right.
I could sell 1,000 and still, have it be a successful book for a smaller company, but get what I want into the hands of the people who want it.
Right.
So some of it's been kind of mystical poetry. Some of it's been more intensive upper level kind of teachings and, kind of deeper mysticism and philosophy of it. Some of it's been practical too. Like my next book that's coming out is just a big book on candle magic. So I'm very excited about that.
That is, yes.
Yeah. So that is pretty much what keeps me busy these days. And we also host a lot of travel and sacred tour. So every other year we go to usually Europe, usually the British Isles, and do some type of sacred tour, although we had to cancel and postpone some stuff because of COVID-19. Do something in America based on the elements. So I'll have different elemental temples based on fire and water and air and earth, and kind of travel different parts of the country and see different sacred sites.
Oh, how cool. Okay.
Lots
of awesome things. And you're located where for our audience?
The other Salem. Everybody always
the other Salem,
Massachusetts, but we're about maybe 45 minutes, an hour away from Salem, Massachusetts, in Salem, New Hampshire.
Beautiful.
Not too far from us is an authentic ancient Stone Age site called America's Stonehenge, and there's a lot of cool stuff in the area. It's not always just Salem, Mass, but when people want to come out and visit, you can go see both of us.
Right. Yeah. Why not? I mean, that's a great trip. Well, so where can people find you and connect with you?
I am on all the wonderful little social medias. If you look up under Christopher Penczak on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. But the best kind of places for detailed information is my website, which is christopherpenczak.com. And a lot of my stuff these days is on the temple's website, which is templeofwitchcraft.org, which is also in all the social medias too. But signing up for our mailing list is probably the most complete way to kind of find out what I'm doing and what I'm putting out and where I'm going to be. And I travel pretty extensively when we can travel. So I could be in a neighborhood near you sometime soon.
That would be great. We're in Asheville, North Carolina right now. Very powerful place. I did not know this,
Absolutely.
but it is called the Sedona of the East.
Yep.
Learning, all of this learning. Just so much.
In the area too. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. So Christopher, I seriously thank you so much for being on. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and I am learning so much, and I just I can't wait to dig into more with you and through you, because I feel I feel really connected in this.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate
I really appreciate being here.
Yes.
Blessed Samhain.
Yes, Samhain. Say it right, Natalie. So much learning, you guys. I'm reading like 15 books.
We accept all.
I'm literally reading like 10 books at a time. So it's called knowledge, just so much of it.
A lot out there. It's good to anchor into it.
Exactly. And as usual, everyone, we're going to have all of Christopher's information on the blog post. So please ensure to check that out and connect further. Thanks again. Have a beautiful rest of the month.
You too. Blessed be.
Thank you for listening to today's episode, and please, in the meantime, if you know anyone or you want to pitch your story, please get in touch with us at disruptnowprogram.com, or you can get in touch with me on Instagram at disruptwithnatalie. Of course, all the information is on our website. Again, thank you, and in the meantime, remember, no status quo.